Hi, this is Cheryl with the Cut at Home Design Team. I'm here today with a fun and contemporary anniversary card featuring a couple of die sets from Sizzix. They're part of the Tim Holtz Alteration line. I just love how this card turned out. So my first set of dies is the sentiments that you see across the card. This is from the set Handwritten Love. So lots of different sentiments in this set that you can use. Again, these dies are thinlits dies, so they're thin. You can use them in virtually any die cutting machine. The set comes with lots of different words and comes in one of their fun little plastic envelopes for storage purposes. Again, remember my caution with that. Unfortunately, these thin dies especially, even when they're a little bit larger, like to escape those envelopes. So always use with it a magnet sheet or a plastic bag to hold the dies, something that further wrangles them so you don't lose little pieces, parts. But again, for my card, I wanted to use more than one sentiment. There wasn't just one here that I thought was perfect, and so I thought I would use a combination. The word cherish, the word love, the word forever. And the way I thought I wanted it to go in my card was love and cherish forever. You can see I didn't end up that way. And let me just flip this over to give you a surface to show you why. So here's where I thought I wanted to be, is with love and cherish. Oops, get over there. Forever. But this presented me with a little bit of design problem and reminded me why it's so important to plan your cards as opposed to cutting things out and just pasting it down. You could make that work, but aesthetically I didn't like it so well because of the long tail on forever. And so I knew I needed to reword or revise my wording here. So I ended up with my forever at the top, cherish. These guys are just holding hands over here and creating problems. Cherish at the bottom and love in the center. So forever, love, and cherish. And I think that makes sense again and made for quite a nice card. I really like the way this turned out. My other set of dies that I used is called Tiny Tattered Florals. Also a Sizzix Tim Holtz Alteration die. We've seen tattered florals from Tim Holtz before, and I just love the dies and the flowers they produce. Here we've got choice of flowers, which makes it even better. One set, 3 different types and looks of flowers. So we've got the traditional roses along with 2 flowers that have more pronounced petals on them. Let me show you the die sets here as well. Again, these are the rose sets. There's 5 other flower dies. Again, more petals with these and lots of different leaves that you could choose. Again, tiny little pieces in this set, so you want to make sure you've wrangled them somehow, either by use of a magnet or by use of a plastic bag or both, so that you don't lose the little pieces, parts. That would just be very disappointing. So I've used all sizes of the roses on my cards, the large, the medium, and the small, a couple of different sizes of leaves as I put it together. Very simple to do the flowers. I love that our friends at Sizzix thought of everything with the die set. You gotta have a little slotted quilling tool to make life easier in rolling these little flowers. They included it. How awesome is that? Make my life easier. I just love that. Here's our cut pieces, the large, the medium, the small flowers. Yes, they're small, but they're manageable. They're not that difficult. I'm going to pick the medium size to show you how they roll up fairly easily. Again, I've got my slotted quilling tool here. I want to put the end of my flower into that slot, and obviously I'm not seeing what I'm doing here. So just slide it right in. You should have a firm grip on it with the quilling tool. You want to be right at the end though. You don't want to extend over like this, for example, because you'll just end up with a funny look in center. So be right at the end and just simply start to roll. You can roll fairly tight in this process. We don't necessarily want the finished flower to be really tight like that, but we can relax it. It's really hard if you roll particularly loose and then try and tighten it up later on. So easy to loosen up, not always so easy to tighten. So continue rolling, rolling, rolling until you get to the center. Rolling on top of itself gets a little bit more difficult the closer you get to the center, but just stick with it. Make sure you're doing practice flowers. Don't start out with one of your, say you short on paper and so you only have 3 good flowers to work with and you need them all for the card. Practice on something else first. Don't do your first roll of flower out of the good stuff. So once I get close to the center, I need to add some glue. Glue is what's going to hold my flower together. So I want a good, solid liquid glue that's going to hold this well. And of course, it's not going to come out of the bottle for me. This is Scotch Quick Dry Adhesive. Oops, now I've got too much glue. Always good to keep a paper towel on hand to dab off any excess so you don't end up with too much of a mess. I've transferred it into that bottle with the precision tip just to make it easier to use. At this point, it's time to get my flower off the quilling tool. So I'm going to balance it. I'm going to hold down the paper flower because I don't want that center especially coming out as I pull the quilling tool. Again, you're just going to coax it out gently, pushing that center back in. This is a point where you can let go of the flower a little bit, let it relax. You don't need it quite so tight. You can make adjustments to make a pretty little flower, and when you're happy with it, you're going to hold it in place for about 30 seconds just to let that glue set a little bit. It won't be fully dry, but it will set so that you can move on. You can set it aside and begin to roll other flowers. So I'm going to set that on my craft mat to dry some more. Now, the flower that I just did, this is one I did earlier. It's also the medium flower. It's fully dry. The glue isn't wet any longer. You can see it's not exactly the same as what I have on my card. It's a little more dimensional. It's also a little brighter color-wise. So I did more to it. I'm going to move my little mat aside here, my little leaf, set my quilling tool out of the way. What I want to do is to place this on scratch paper or on a craft mat or something like that, and I'm going to spray it to moisten it a little bit. Here I'm using the Tim Holtz Distress Spray Stain in antique linen. That's going to give it that vintagey color a little bit, as well as moisten it so that I can flatten it a little bit. You could also simply spray the flower with plain water, and that would work just fine. 1 spritz is enough if you get the flower on the first shot, which I did. So I'm going to stop with 1 spritz. At this point, I'm taking a clear acrylic block, and I'm going to set it down on that flower and do some firm, even pressure. I'm not going to press all the way to the table because I don't want it flat. I just want to flatten it somewhat. And so you can see that gives it a more vintagey look than my freshly rolled flower. Again, it's a matter of preference. Which do you prefer? I prefer the more vintagey look on mine. It makes the cards a little bit more mailable. Oops, as that flies off and everything else. Again, if we look at the representation on the card, the roses are intact. While they're wet, you can push the petals around and make them do what you want them to do. Make sure both stages you let them firmly dry before you move on. So my freshly glued flower needs to dry before I distress it. My distressed flower needs to fully dry before I think about adding it to the card. But a simple process. The roses are very, very easy to roll. They're not that difficult. Now let me get some of my extra distress spray off there, and let me show you how to work on shaping the leaves. There's a difference between the very flat leaf that you get that I can never pick up by using the die cut there, and one where we just use some very simple techniques to add a little detail and a little life to that leaf. So let me show you how that works. I'm going to set it on. This is a leaf mat from the original Sizzix Susan's Garden flower tool set. I'm just going to set it on the veining mat. All the tool sets are a little different, but they usually have some sort of mat that you can use to add veins to leaves. I'm going to use the veining tool and just simply draw a line down the center and some little lines at the side to add some dimension. Then I'm going to grab that leaf with my tweezers right here at the base, and I'm going to sort of cup it together and pinch the top and bend it back a little, and now I have a much more dimensional leaf. To make it match my flowers better, I also, once I get all my leaves done, want to hit it with a little spray of the Distress Spray Stain, just to moisten it a little bit, to add a little of the distressy color. And that's where I end up. The Distress Stain tends to gather in those creases that you make with the veining tool, and you just end up with a nice vintagey leaf. So a little bit of dimension for my leaves also makes my flower bouquets look a little more vintagey and lifelike. So I love how this turned out. Again, they're two Sizzix Tim Holtz Alterations sets, the Handwritten Love and the tiny Tattered Florals. I know that you'll find them to be part of your go-to sets. You'll use them frequently, the flowers especially, but also the sentiments. Thanks for watching. Bye.